Starting in 7th grade, he entered Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Washington, and after graduating from Our Lady of Good Counsel High School, he was accepted into the engineering school at the University of Maryland. After one semester, he left College Park and transferred to Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg. John graduated from the Mount in 1986 with a bachelor's degree in business and finance, followed by an MBA in 1987. In 1996, he earned a master's degree in liberal arts from St. John's College in Annapolis, and his book, The Meaning of Mount St. Mary's, which is available in the Mount bookstore, makes the case that the Mount is the mother of Catholic education in the United States. In the beginning of this book, John argues that the, quote, superpowers of Mount St. Mary's are felt not in the achievement of a credential or in the accomplishment of high office, but in the formation of a happy home. As a husband of 30 years and as a father of 3, John practices what he preaches. So without further ado, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Mr. John Singleton.
There, out in the darkness, a fugitive running, fallen from God, fallen from grace. God be my witness, I never shall yield till we come face to face, till we come face to face. So I hope you all can come back to your alma mater one day and sing a show tune. That was a thrill. Thank you. Let me put something up on the screen here. How many of you, well, raise your hand if you've seen Les Mis, the movie. Oh, good. Yeah, this one. Hang on, this one.
The 2012 version, not the 2008 version.
Right. The musical. Would have to be the musical. So what does this image of Hugh Jackman and Russell Crowe have to do with the Mount? It turns out a lot of things. Well, they're both, the Mount and Les Mis are Catholic works of art. They both take place around the same time period, Revolutionary France. They both have a saintly protagonist, the fugitive priest John Dubois in the case of Mount St. Mary's. Hugh Jackman as Jean Valjean in the case of Les Mis. They both involve an antagonist who is, I guess, best described as a tyrannical representation of state authority. That would be Inspector Javert, played by Russell Crowe. And in real life, that person would be Maximilien Robespierre, the architect of the French Revolution. So my point is that the Mount's story is epic, and tonight we're going to talk about that a little bit. It spans 2 revolutions, it spans continents, and it's a story of faith and humanity that, interestingly enough, is mirrored a great deal in Victor Hugo's novel. I'm not saying that that Victor Hugo stole any of the stories about John Dubois and Maximilien Robespierre, but he may have. The really interesting thing is that Maximilien Robespierre and John Dubois were boyhood friends. They went to school together. And they obviously went on different paths as they grew up. John Dubois became a priest. Maximilien Robespierre became the architect of the French Revolution, the man who would dismantle the Catholic Church in France and hunt priests in the street to behead them by the guillotine. But what happened was that it was Robespierre who actually signed the papers secretly that allowed John Dubois to escape to America. They were friends, and they met on a street in Paris one morning, and Robespierre brought John Dubois back to his flat as the ruler of the revolution, as the leader of the revolution, and he signed those papers. So that little twist of fate would allow the French priest to become one of the greatest champions of religious freedom in America. In this short talk tonight, I hope we'll rediscover the history of the Mount together and the mythology. when you walk away from tonight, I hope that your perception of the mount might be changed a little bit, and that maybe even your perception as sons and daughters of the mount will also be changed. I'm hoping this will be a little bit like a pep rally on this feast day of the Holy Name of Mary, I believe that is correct. So it's an appropriate time to have this talk. Let me introduce myself. My name is John Singleton. I graduated from the Mount in 1986. I was very much an average student. I am not a teacher. I'm not a PhD. I don't really have any academic expertise. I think maybe the advantage in that is that sometimes it takes an outsider or maybe a voice in the wilderness to point out things that are hidden in plain sight. And I think we have a lot of things about the Mount that for some reason are not very well known, so we're going to talk about those tonight. Let's see, I'm a husband, father, and for the last 30 years I've been an entrepreneur down the road in Annapolis. The one thing I'm not is a singer, as you found out. Am I a writer? We'll see soon here as you listen to some of these stories, but I do want to thank Gavin Hamrick and AEI for having me here tonight. Certainly the Mount administration as well for having me here. When I was asked to talk about the meaning of Mount St. Mary's, which is this book that I've written, the topic could have been any of the 12 heroes that I wrote about in the book, but I chose to stick with probably the two first and most essential of those heroes, and we'll talk about those, one of them being John Dubois. Obviously, we've already talked about him a little bit. When I got to the Mount, just to say a few more words, when I got to the Mount in the 80s, the Mount was not my first choice, as Gavin mentioned. I was at the University of Engineering School at the University of Maryland, and when things didn't go right there, I needed to pivot very quickly, and the Mount was the only other school I knew anything about. That was before the internet. So here I was, and I found myself, walking around this quiet campus many, many times as a freshman and sophomore, wondering, why am I here? It was a quiet place, kind of out of the way, and it was a question that I asked often, and I have come to believe that question needed time to gestate. It needed gestation, right? If you know that word. Way back when in the 80s, let me say this, the liberal arts. So when I got here, I started taking liberal arts courses, philosophy, theology, history, literature, and I stopped taking engineering courses. And that was uncomfortable at first. And then I started to see a pattern when I was taking my courses, and I started to see, I think, the true, the good, and the beautiful in and across all the disciplines, and also seeing the fake and the bad and the ugly, right? I was starting to differentiate those things, and that was hard at first. But the lines were still fuzzy. I was a young man, and I wasn't quite all the way there yet, but it started to put me in the right direction. As a grown man, when I thought back on the Mount, I thought of two things a lot. Two distinguishing things about the Mount and the founding story of the Mount, and that is the mountain, right, and the cave, right? So, we'll talk more about the founding of the Mount, but those two symbols rooted in legend and lore made me think about the Mount's history as less factual and more mythological, right? And by the time my kids got to college, I had listened to every origin story out there about state schools, Catholic schools, Ivies, but none of them have the origin story of the Mount that start with the mountain and the cave, and I'll get into that a little bit. But there's nothing equal to the Mount's mythology. And this explains why the Mount remains, I think, in a perpetually delicate condition that requires a lengthy duration between conception and birth, right? It's gestational. One of the Mount's powers is this power of gestation. let's talk a little bit more about John Dubois. It was a dark night in 1805 on the Emmitsburg Road, if you haven't heard this story before, when John Dubois was riding on horseback and he saw a light on the mountain. And the light flickered and attracted his attention. He was tired. He wanted to go home. He was out administering the sacraments up and around Frederick County in Pennsylvania. And so he followed the light. He went up on the mountain. And when he got to the place where he thought he saw it, there was nothing there. He was exhausted. He collapsed. He fell asleep under a starry night sky. And he awoke the next morning with a spectacular view of a distant valley, this valley right out here. And behind him was a dark cave. So he took a cross and he walked into the cave and he affixed it to the center of the cave. And that's when he got the idea to found Mount St. Mary's and name it after, I'm sure, Marian shrines that he'd seen in France. And so he would dedicate a school to the Mother of God on that very spot. Named for Mary, the Mount's history and legacy would become a prolific one. Mount St. Mary's is the first Catholic college in the 50 states. Now you might say, what about Georgetown? Well, Georgetown forfeited that distinction when in 1791 it was redistricted to a federal territory. There were only 14 American states then. Mount St. Mary's is the first Catholic college named for the Mother of God. Mount St. Mary's is the first U.S. college named for a woman. All of this is in the book. Now you might say, John, what about William and Mary? William and Mary is named for a man and a woman. That's different, right? Okay, I've got to use my technology here and get to that image. Okay. So producing pioneers of the first Catholic schools, right, like Elizabeth Seton and Archbishop John Hughes of New York, who established the parochial system in New York City, right, both Mounties. The Mounts heroes clinched the rivets of the church and Catholic education across America. Moreover, the University of Notre Dame, Catholic University, Seton Hall, St. John's University, Fordham, and many others could never have happened without the heroism of the Mounts, trailblazing priests, right at the beginning. If you remember nothing else about tonight's talk, it's that Mount St. Mary's is the mother of Catholic education in the United States, and we should talk more about that. Okay, so when I was in school, I spent a lot of time looking at this image here, right? I couldn't really figure out what it was. It was a statue. It was a statue of Mary. I didn't notice this detail here that she was stepping on a snake. It took me years after graduation to figure that out. That she wore a crown, right? All those things were kind of lost on me. So anyway, to put that in perspective, let's go back to to first things, right? So I will read this. I will put enmities between thee and the woman, and thy seed and her seed. She shall crush thy head, and thou shalt lie in wait for her heel. Okay? So how does the King James Version, right, the Church of England, the Revised Version, how does that interpret the same line? And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Okay, that's different, right? Did you guys pick up on the differences there? If you look closely at these two accounts, and let me back up just for a minute. When most people want to learn about Mary, they go to the Gospels. That's normal, right? The Annunciation, Mary at the manger, we all know those stories. The Christmas story, those are great stories. Few people look to these verses, right, in the Bible to learn about Mary, even though they are highly descriptive and very helpful in understanding who she is. So if you look at those two accounts I just read, you'll see it comes down to a question of pronouns, right? Sound familiar? The Genesis account, it says, she shall crush thy head. Right? See it up there? That's a future act. That she, that future woman, is Mary. That future act takes place in the book of Revelation, which we'll get to in that larger quote at the bottom. Specifically when Mary confronts a dragon at the end of time. In the King James Version, there, right? The wording in the second half of the sentence is changed. It's more ambiguous. It doesn't say she anymore, it says it, right? It doesn't say, it says thou, right? Not her, right? It's changed, it's revised. So we have to ask ourselves why that would be the case. But to clarify, right, let's go to Revelation. And I'm just going to read the first sentence, right, and the last sentence. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Okay, there's a crown. She's up in the sky. Catholics will call Mary the Queen of Heaven, right? Because right here in the Bible it says she is crowned. Well, only a queen is crowned, right? And then if we look at the last sentence, and she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with an iron rod, and her son was taken up to God. So she is pregnant, right? She is wearing a crown, she's a queen, and she's stepping on a snake. All those things I missed for many, many years. I missed them all, right? But I think what we're doing tonight is we're slowing down and we're taking a look at things that maybe we've never seen before or maybe forgotten. So I think one of the things to take away from this image is that Mary is a dragon slayer. And you saw the poster for this event. It was a knight slaying a dragon, right? But Mary, too, is a dragon slayer. Okay, so we're going to the mythological mountain, right? We have our own mountain here. This is a picture of Eden, right, where Eden was supposedly established on a mountain, right? But let's talk about John Dubois for a second. So he arrived in America with nothing, not just America, but Protestant Virginia, and he was received warmly. He's invited to offer Mass in the State House in Richmond, and shortly thereafter, he's invited to meet with two founders, right, two American founders, James Monroe and Patrick Henry. So from them, he gets a first-hand account of the U.S. Constitution and religious liberty American style, right? And so what does he do? He goes out and he starts testing the Constitution. He starts founding parishes, and he's surprised because there's no political interference. He then stumbles into a cave on the side of a mountain, and we have Mount St. Mary's. But stitched into this story of John Dubois are all of these archetypal forms of the past, right? We had a flickering light, right? But like, what is a burning bush on the side of a mountain, right? It's a flickering light, just like another founder, right? What is awaking from a dream, right? Like he did after his rough night on the mountain. It's a nod to St. John the Revelator, maybe, and his vision of the woman of the apocalypse, which we'll get back to in a minute. The original grotto itself was not a cave, right? It was not made of stone. It was made of a tree. It was a hollowed out tree, right? When the tree died, eventually, right, a man-made grotto was constructed out of stone. We called it a replica of the grotto at Lourdes, France, since by that time, Lourdes was very famous. But something deeper has been going on here at Mount St. Mary's, I think. In the Catholic Church, the Mother of God is known as the Tree of Life. Her first fruit is Jesus Christ. From the Emmitsburg cave, the Word of God was born and launched across a new continent. America was brand new back then, right? The first American saint was tutored by John Dubois, Elizabeth Seton. The first American martyr went to the Mount. So another thing I say in the book is, when it comes to the Catholic Church in America, all roads lead back to this place, this tiny, obscure little town. Very strange, right? And believe me, Georgetown and Notre Dame would love to have this legacy, but they don't. The grotto at Mount St. Mary's is not simply a replica of another shrine somewhere far away. It's America's first shrine to religious freedom and the place where Mary appeared in the mind of a French priest when he stepped into a mountain cave. Let me say a little bit more about how heroes are made, because I think Mount St. Mary's has a special quality for creating heroes. In tales of medieval chivalry, a brave knight fights a dragon to get gold and rescue a fair maiden. On Mary's Mountain, if we go back to that image, right? On Mary's Mountain, a golden virgin fights, right, a serpent to save an innocent child, right? Because in this account, it says, "And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to be delivered, that when she should be delivered, he might devour her son." So the dragon, right, wants to kill the child. So, like St. George, Perseus, Beowulf, and many others, Mary is a dragon slayer. But she's a paradox and also a perfection of these hero myths. Mary is both a hero and a hero maker. She's a hero by her actions redeeming the original confrontation with the snake in the garden in Eden, right, with Eve. She redeems that, and also by rebuffing a dragon at the end of time. You'll see in this account, this dragon was huge. There was seen another sign in heaven, and behold, a great dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems, and his tail drew a third of the stars from the sky, from heaven. That's a really big dragon. So at the beginning, right, in the Garden of Eden, the snake was small, and now, at the end of the Bible, in Revelation, it's a huge dragon. So one thing we can take away from that is evil is growing, right? So Mary, I want to leave you with that thought, is that she's a dragon slayer. She's also a hero maker by having given birth to the greatest hero that ever was. Mary is both a brave knight and a fair maiden. Okay, so you got to wrap your mind around that. But unlike modern interpretations, she's not an imitation of a male hero. She's not a female lead mimicking a male protagonist, right? She's a fierce and feminine defender. She stares death in the face and doesn't flinch, and she retains her distinctly feminine mystique. A little more about the grotto. There you see the dragon-slaying image, right? The grotto is a gold mine of mythology. You've got to go there. It's a wilderness rite of passage. It's the antidote to the anxieties of the technological age. Go climb the mountain, right? Like Narnia and Middle-earth, the grotto at Mount St. Mary's is an enchanted world. The woods have always been that way, a place of magic and danger where encounters with strange beings test bravery, right, and excite the religious impulse. Tolkien and Lewis were masters of this, right? Medieval legend is full of this. The fire-breathing dragon, the griffin, the troll under the bridge. They're crucibles not for saving the world, but for making the man more himself. In Narnia, the forest is home to fauns and talking beavers, right? In Middle-earth, the woods are full of fairies and elves. Tolkien and Lewis insert these strange characters as intercessory guides to hasten the process of heroic transformation. What else would they be for, right? At the grotto, these myths give way to the Christian saints. Francis of Assisi, Charbel of Lebanon, Seton of Emmitsburg. The narrative ascent of Mount St. Mary's is upward, heavenward. Mountains are where heroes rise. Caves are where dragons live. To stand at the gates of the grotto is to gaze at a war in heaven, where Our Lady soars at ground zero in a cosmic battle between good and evil. Right? And you see these two images. They're the same, right? And if I flash back to the golden one, it's also the same. They're all the same image. She's a brave knight. So endowed with these epic elements, a cave, a mountain, a dragon-slaying woman, the mount is endowed with a hero-making engine. It can't be denied. Okay. So let's go back into Marian history and talk about this a little bit, these two images. Okay? In 431, the Council of Ephesus was convened in what is now modern-day Turkey. Up until that time, and for 1,000 years prior, the fertility goddess Artemis dominated the spiritual life of a culture that was obsessed with sex and sexual gratification. Making pilgrimage to Ephesus, devotees from around the Mediterranean participated in the festivals of Artemis, which featured the sexual favors of eunuchs, sibyls, and shrine prostitutes, not to mention the practice of child sacrifice. By declaring Mary the Mother of God, the Council of Ephesus changed the game. The Catholic Church rejected crude caricatures, right, of female biology and elevated the status of womanhood beyond sexual objectification. By replacing the many-breasted Artemis, right, with Mary, the primary male-female relationship was reoriented from one that exalted in sexual amusement to one that venerated a maternal bond, mother and child, right? Bestowing the titles Queen of Heaven and Mother of God, the Council of Ephesus traded the fetishes of the cult for the joys of the family. Launching a new mythology, the Catholic Church raised the responsibilities of motherhood to the status of the divine. In Emmitsburg, school is not just a means of maximizing career prospects. It's preparation for the home. Domestic bliss, that heroic endeavor, is at the moral center of Mary's Mountain. The proximity of the Father and the Son, nope, I missed a word. Personified by the proximity of the Father and the Son, Catholic education, which traces its roots in America to Emmitsburg, is preparation for the family unit. At Mount St. Mary's, we have a mother, too, making a happy family the focus of the academic enterprise. The Holy Ghost is here as well, acquainting all comers with a foretaste of heaven, which is the family structure. Only at a school so constituted can students be prepared for a promising profession and a happy home. Mount St. Mary's is endowed with a prophetic destiny. Its history has been, for many years, hidden in plain sight. The racket of the world attracts the attention to noisier places, but the Mount is blessed with a natural humility. That's because taking credit is not a Marian quality. She gets things born. Mary is the shape of things to come. Countercultural figures have hailed in disproportionate numbers from tiny Emmitsburg, heroes, saints, and martyrs. Our Lady's presence assures this trend will continue. Emmitsburg has not seen its last saint, much less its last hero. In closing, let me guess that when you arrived here on this campus, there were times when you asked yourself, why am I here? Let me suggest to you that by arriving in Emmitsburg, you entered a charged pattern, that you are being formed by forces beyond your control. You're being drawn into an adventure that can't be denied. So that one day soon, when you ask yourself, why am I here? The Blessed Mother answers, to be a hero. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for helping us to see those things hidden in plain sight. We're going to go to question and answer now. If you want to just raise your hand, I could bring the mic to you, and you can ask your question.